download a single file, box.exe, and you can place it on your desktop or stick it inside of a folder somewhere, and you can just double click on it to run it. If you're on a Mac, if you use Homebrew, which is a very popular package manager, you can just type brew install CommandBox. It's kind of ironic since CommandBox is a package manager. You can use a package manager to install your package manager. If you're on Linux, you can just directly download the binary. We also have apt and yum repositories, so there's lots of different ways to install it. If you're just looking for the download link, if you just go to google.com and you type in CommandBox, usually the first page to come up will be our site. Actually, I don't know if it'll be this first page for you. See, Google has personalized results for me, so it's hard to actually say if you Google if you find the same thing. If you go to ordersolutions.com and explore the products, then you'll see CommandBox on there. We just recently rearranged our site, so even I'm like, oh, where is it? So we have a download button right here at the top of the page, which takes you down here, and this is where you can actually download stuff. So if you're on Windows, any version, then you can just click on Windows binary. If you're on a machine that does not have Java installed, like at all, like it's a brand new computer, we also have JRE included versions, which just comes with a JRE folder that has Java. It's the exact same version of CommandBox. So there's a couple ways that you can run CommandBox. Actually, let me exit out of CommandBox. I'm using a terminal here called ConEMU. I mostly like it because it has some cool shortcuts that the Windows terminal doesn't do. But I've put CommandBox on my particular computer into a folder under program files just because it seemed like a useful place to put it. It's not a requirement per se. So I just created a CommandBox folder under program files, and that's where I have my box.exe. You'll notice I also have a JRE folder there. That's the Java version it's using. And so I've added this path to my Windows path environment variable. So that means that anywhere on my computer, I can just type box. Oh my gosh, I can't type it. I can type box and I can type a command after it, like box version, and it'll find command box because it's in that Windows system path, and I can run a command from it. The first time you ever run command box, it'll do a little bit of unpacking, and it'll create some folders on your hard drive, and after that, it'll just run. So this is the first way you can use command box. So this is the same way you would use like the Git CLI or the Docker CLI or pretty much any CLI out there. Is you would be at your your own Windows or Bash shell, and you just run a command that starts with box and then the name of whatever it is you want to run. Um, and the reason this says build version and build number is because I have my local installation of CommandBox symlink to the Git repository, and this is what I have are just placeholders for the build version. The second way you can run CommandBox, which is how I generally use it, is if you just run box without any parameters, which is the equivalent of just double clicking on the icon on your desktop. Then instead of running a command and then exiting back out to your native shell, it'll drop you into what I refer to as the interactive shell. And so we're still running inside of the terminal app of Windows, but the blinking cursor, if you will, the shell is being controlled by CommandBox. So CommandBox has its own shell built in where you can live in its own little world where everything's nice. And there's tab completion, there's prompt customizers. In fact, if you have CommandBox installed, you may notice that you don't have the same prompt that I have here. You may have just a simple one. That's because I'm using a module called Bullet Train. And if you want to use that, you can type install. I'm using tab here, which is why you see options coming up. You can say install CommandBox hyphen bullet hyphen train, and that will install the module that gives you these cool little customized prompts, which I totally recommend doing. It's really handy. It tells you what directory you're in, which is my home directory. And there's a bunch of other information you'll see pop in there. So if earlier I ran box version as my sort of sample command. If once I'm in the command box shell, I don't need to type box anymore. I can just type version. And when I hit enter, you see it runs the exact same thing. So I typically, for as a ColdFusion developer, I just leave a command box window open. If you use VS Code, a lot of people like to use the terminal inside of VS Code. I don't really care for that because it makes it small, and oftentimes I'm doing something that doesn't fit well on a tiny little terminal window. But that's up to you. So one of the cool things about command box is it is written in ColdFusion. So even though CommandBox is a natively installed binary that you're running, directly on Windows or Mac or Linux, behind the scenes it's still powered by ColdFusion, and we power it with Lucy Server. If you use the info command, just type info in addition to an ASCII art stereogram, which if you diverge your eyes will look three-dimensional, there's also some information here. You can see that we're bundling Lucy Server as the cold fusion engine that powers CommandBox, and I'm using the bleeding edge of CommandBox right now. I just updated it to the latest Lucy release. This is a great screen for debugging. It will tell you what version of Java CommandBox is using. It'll show you exactly where that Java lives. It'll even tell you what user you're logged into your operating system as, which can help you troubleshoot permissions errors. And it'll also tell you where Box lives, which can be handy if you have more than one Box file and you're a little confused about where they are. But most all of the implementation of CommandBox is in CFML, which is pretty fun. So the first time you run it, it will unpack itself out of the exe into your user home directory, which if you're on a Unix-based operating system is going to be a little different path here. And there'll be a dot command box folder. And everything that command box uses is basically hidden in this folder. You don't necessarily need to care too much about this folder. If command box ever gets just completely screwed up, you can just delete this folder and it'll get recreated, though you will lose, servers that you started and stuff like that. Inside of this is the artifact directory. Anytime command box downloads something, it'll store those downloads here on the hard drive. That's where those are at. The actual Lucy server instance is hiding here into this engine folder. That's where that lives. If CommandBox downloads versions of Java for you, they go here in the server JREs folder. The jars that CommandBox uses go here. Again, you don't really need to worry about those. And then the CFML folder has all of the actual Cold Fusion code that powers CommandBox. So even though the Lucy server inside of CommandBox is not running as a web server, it's not something you can hit in the browser. There's no ports or anything. But it is still a Lucy server running. It's being used via JSR 223. And so the cool thing is you can actually make modifications um, to these Cold Fusion files. And if you restart Command Box, you can actually test those changes. So it's kind of fun because you can work on Command Box and play around making customizations since it's all just written in Cold Fusion. So using our CLI, and let me know if the font is too small. I've increased my terminal size. Hopefully everyone can see this fine. Using the CLI, um, you may notice that I ran the version command earlier. If I delete a character so I haven't typed the full word, you see how the text is white? And as soon as I type the letter N to complete the command, the text turns yellow. That's a little trick that the CLI does to let you know if it recognizes what you've typed as a valid command. Um, so ColdBox create app is a valid command. But if I spell it wrong, you notice that the last word is white because CommandBox doesn't recognize that. So that's kind of a handy little trick to keep in mind. If you hit enter and it says it doesn't know what command you typed, but it hadn't turned yellow, then it's because it didn't recognize it. It'll also try to guess what you may have meant. So if I type ColdBox create apps, it'll say, "Did you mean ColdBox create app?" So it'll try to help you as much as possible. One of the things that I didn't like about CLIs myself before I wrote CommandBox is I thought they were hard to use, and it was difficult to try to remember all the options that you needed to type. And so we tried to make CommandBox be a more easy to use CLI. So we have highlighting. There's also some other cool stuff. You see, when I type this second quote sign, it highlights the first and the second, the beginning and the last one is red. That's something that you get in VS Code. It's something Excel used to do years ago in editing formulas. Just helps you make sure your quote signs are all lined up. There's also a built-in help command. Oops, you have to spell it right for it to work. If you just type help, you will get a list. I should really format this. When I first wrote this command, there were a lot fewer options, and now there's a lot more, and I waste a lot of screen space. I need to put this into a table or something. These are all top level commands that CommandBox knows how to run. And since CommandBox is its own shell, it is basically mimicking a lot how Bash works, and also to a degree a Windows shell, like a command shell. But these are all implemented in ColdFusion. So you see, we have a CD command to change directories. We have a CP command to copy files. We have a CAT command, which actually is short for concatenate, which dumps out the contents of files, right? An MV command to move files, SED, stream editor. These are all commands you probably recognize from Bash or from your Windows command prompt. But CommandBox has its own versions of these, and these are all written in ColdFusion. Then there's a bunch of namespaces, and so CommandBox sort of organizes the commands, some of the commands into namespaces so they're easier to remember and they're kind of grouped together. So if we take a namespace like ColdBox, where'd it go? I was just looking at it. Oh, it's right here in front of me. So one of our namespaces is ColdBox. So I can type ColdBox help, and now I get help that's specific to that namespace. And there's a shortcut. Instead of typing the word help, you can also just use a question mark. You just slap a question mark on the end of a command, and you'll get the most context specific help that CommandBox can give you. So we can see that there's a ColdBox reinit command, there's a ColdBox watch reinit command, right? And then there's another nested namespace called ColdBox create. So I can say, okay, what's inside of that one? And here's where well, I'll show you tab completion separately in just a second. So now I can type ColdBox create and add a question mark again, and now I get help about ColdBox create. So the help is getting more specific as I go. And so it says there's a command called ColdBox create app, right? Let me spell it right. And so I can type ColdBox create app and hit question mark. And now I get the help for the ColdBox create app command. It has a description of what the command does. It creates a blank ColdBox application. It tells me what the options are. It gives me sort of copy and paste examples that I can just run if I want to try it out. And then we have a list of all of the arguments to the command, right? The name of the app, what skeleton we want to use. It tells us types that are anything other than a string, like Boolean. It shows us default values. And then finally from there, we can sort of we can discover on our own what the commands are and what they do all from the command line. Now, if you don't like using the CLI and using the help screens in the CLI, we do have um, an HTML version of this exact same information. If you go to apidocs.ortusolutions.com, go into the command box folder, and go to the current folder, which always just points to whatever the last release was. Open up that index file. Here we have the exact same information, and I can drill down ColdBox, create app, and I can get the same list of parameters. I can get the same description of the command, the same example commands. It's just an HTML version of the exact same information. And what's fun is that we pull this from the metadata on the CFCs, the ColdFusion, components that implement it. So this is all automatically generated. And of course, um, there is a filter as well if you want to search and help find something. Okay, there's also tab completion. So if I start typing COLD and I hit tab, CommandBox just finishes it for me because it knows there's only one thing that it knows about that starts with cold, and it's ColdBox. And if I hit tab again, I get the same information that I got from the help screen, but I only have to hit one key to get that information. Um, I can keep hitting tab. I'm just hitting the tab key over and over again, or I can hold down the shift key and hit tab and it goes in reverse, and I can cycle through these options. So I can come down to the create namespace and hit enter. I can hit tab again and I get all the same commands inside of here that we were looking at, we had the first sentence of the description of each command. So I can use tab and shift tab to move around. I can hit enter to select app, and then I can hit tab again. And now I get all of the parameters for the command, including the little description of the parameter, right? So I can tab, tab, tab down and choose skeleton equals, and then I can hit tab again. And now CommandBox shows me all of the possible values for this parameter, right? I hit tab again and it says, okay, here's all parameters you haven't used yet. Um, And so, like, there's a verbose flag that's a Boolean. So if I hit tab, I get true and false. So CommandBox will try like as hard as it possibly can to figure out what all the possible things are you could do when you hit tab based on what you typed so far. So it's parsing what you've typed to that point, and then the tab completion will try to figure out what could possibly come next. And if you still have questions, you can always just throw a question mark or the word help at the end, and you'll still get that help screen, right? So the help will just be as specific to whatever it is you type so far. Um, so let's talk about parameters real quick. Everything in command box, as you've kind of seen, is built around this idea that there's commands and the commands do things. So the only two commands I've really run so far is the version command and the info command. Um, Let me actually jump over to my sandbox folder. The go-to command is not part of CommandBox. That's actually a module somebody wrote that you can install into CommandBox, and that is called the CommandBox Bookmarks module. It's really kind of handy. Um, I'm trying to remember. Let's see here. Bookmarks. So this is a command that Adam, I think Ewens, I always pronounce his last name wrong. Sorry, Adam, if you're listening. It allows you to create shortcuts, different folders in your hard drive, which is actually pretty handy. So I have a shortcut called Sandbox I created that just points to the Sandbox folder, and I can just type go to Sandbox and tab completion even works there. Super handy. Like I said, I didn't even write this. Somebody in the community wrote this, and it's called Command Box Bookmarks. If you want to take a look, by the way, I don't know how many people here are familiar with ForgeBox. ForgeBox is a website that is run by my same company, Ortus, and this is the Maven of Java or the composer of PHP, or the npmjs.org of Node. This is the package repository where anybody can put any ColdFusion packages. Doesn't have to be specific to ColdBox or CommandBox. It can really be any type of ColdFusion code. If we come in here and filter on CommandBox modules, holy cow, there's 78 CommandBox modules. Is that real? Are there really 78 CommandBox modules? Look, our pagination is off. It says showing 1 through 30 of 79. The reason is because one of these is a private module that only I can see, and these numbers here are cached for everyone. And so there's only 78 that most people can see, but I can see 79. That's kind of funny. And there's all sorts of modules in here that basically add functionality into CommandBox, which is kind of cool. So if I were to search for, I spelled it wrong. That was a search ForgeBox for the word bookmark. I would be able to pull up this bookmarks module. Yeah, Adam Ewens. Ewens? I don't know. I felt bad when I met him in person last. He told me I've been pronouncing his name wrong this entire time. Because we'll say it sometimes on our podcast. And so you can see, all the kind of documentation of the module, what it does, how to install it. And there's tons of modules. In fact, the bullet train module that I showed you earlier, you can also come on to ForgeBox and oh, look, there's that private package. And you can open up the CommandBox bullet train module and you can see how to install it and how it works and all the options. So ForgeBox is basically the website that anything you install comes from. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Okay. So everything works as commands, and commands have parameters. For any type of parameter that's not a Boolean, there's two ways you can specify them. Oops, here we have a make directory command, right? If I look at the help, it's fairly simple. It works pretty much like what you're probably expecting from Windows or Linux. Um, you type make dir and you give it the name of a directory. It takes two parameters, the directory you want to create, obviously. And then since I've written these commands myself in ColdFusion. I can make them do whatever I want. So I have a CD flag, which is a Boolean, which you can set to true that after it creates the directory, it'll change into that directory because I get tired of typing things like make dir foo ampersand ampersand cd foo, right? Like that sucks. Why would I want to type all that? So in CommandBox, I can say make a directory called foo, and well, so I'll do positional parameters first. So I can specify my parameters positionally, which is what you're probably used to. This is how most shells work. So the first parameter is the name of the directory. The second parameter is that, yes, I want to change into that directory. And so we create a foo directory, and now we've changed into it, which is the same as me typing cd foo. And oh, look, tab completion works on the directories because tab completion works for everything. So there's other ways you can call the commands. You can say make directory equals foo, and I'm using tab completion again to finish this stuff. And then I can say change directory equals true. So this is the exact same way to run the exact same command, but with position with named parameters. And so this is very similar to ColdFusion in that regard, in that you can have when you call it, a function in ColdFusion, you can do it positionally or with named parameters. And typically, if I'm just using command box, I'm using positional parameters because it's quick and easy. But if you're writing like a command box recipe file that you're going to save and run at a later date, and you want something that's more self-documented, this might read better to you. Now, the make directory command is a very simple example, but there are commands that have, uh, a, a dozen parameters to them. And so if you only want to provide the first parameter and the second to the last parameter, you pretty much have to use named arguments. Now, here's the final trick, and that is that Boolean parameters can be specified like so. And this is regardless. Actually, let me go back up a directory. This is regardless of whether or not you use named or positional parameters. We can say make directory foo, and then if we just do dash dash cd, that will set the cd parameter to true automatically. Nice little shortcut. So less typing, and it works on um, any Boolean parameter. If you wanted to get the opposite, you can say put the word no in front of it, or on Windows, you can use an exclamation mark. Either of those will basically negate the Boolean parameter and will say, don't change into that directory, which of course is a little pointless since it automatically defaults to false, but I'm just kind of showing you how that works. So that's how the parameters work, passing things in. Quoting things, you don't need to quote a simple string that has no spaces or special characters. I can type echo Brad and it echoes out Brad, right? Now this is actually works slightly different than Echo in other languages, and that's or not languages, never shells, and that's because Echo is a built-in in most shells, and Echo is just a regular old command in command box, and so it follows all the same argument parsing rules. So if I say Echo Brad would, the wood is lost, right? And the reason is if we look at Echo, it only takes one parameter called text, and since I didn't quote this to make it a single parameter, it passed in would as a second parameter, which was promptly ignored, in the same way that passing additional arguments to a ColdFusion function would be ignored. So, answer simple, you wrap it in quotes, right? That makes it a single string. It can be single quotes, it can be double quotes, which is basically how ColdFusion works. Um, Unlike Bash, there is no parsing difference between single and double quotes. Expansions will happen in both of those. You can also um, use it's not really a subshell, though that's what they would call it in Bash. But you can use backticks to run a command sort of inside of its own little execution. So but I'm trying to think of a good example of how to show this. Here we go. Let's just echo Brad to a file called directory name.txt. And so this caret or this greater than sign works the same as it would in Bash or in Windows. We're just taking this text and putting it into a file of that name, which is right there. So I could say make directory, and then actually let me back up. I can say cat Oops. Oh, okay, hit Control C and screwed it up. What did I do? No. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and restart this shell because something got screwed up. I honestly don't know what just happened there. Jump back into command box again. Go back to my sandbox folder. Okay, there we go. That was weird. Okay, so cat directory name dot text outputs the text that I put inside of it. So I can say make directory inside of backticks, which is the character below your escape key. I can say run the command cat dir name dot text and then use the output as the parameter to make directory, and it creates a directory called Brad. So if you're from Windows, you might not be familiar with this. If you use Mac or Linux, you probably use this all the time. It's just I call it a backtick expansion. It's sort of creating a subshell in Bash, but the idea is everything inside the backticks gets executed first, and the result of that command gets put in place of whatever this parameter is. So that's how the backtick expansions work. There's a bunch of commands in CommandBox that do all sorts of cool things, and I don't even have time to talk about them all. A lot of these you probably recognize from Bash, but there's pretty cool stuff like unique. You can pipe in a list of names that'll take out the duplicates. There's sort, which will sort a list of items. Um, Recipe basically allows you to run a think of like a batch file in Windows or just a shell script in Bash, but instead it's full of command box commands. Um, JQ is a very popular command in Bash. We have our own version of it as well. For each is pretty cool. You can pipe in a line break delimited list or JSON array or struct, and you can loop over each item and run a command against them. There's all sorts of commands in here. So in addition to being able to run command box commands, right? Like we can run snake and we can play the snake game. This is actually pretty fun. Don't ask me why command box is a snake game. It was the first time I experimented with redrawing the screen basically. I lost. Okay, so you can run a command box command that does this thing, or command box allows you to run native um, binaries from your operating system. So when I run dir, right, I get a directory listing. But this directory listing is the command box command. So this is powered by the ColdFusion directory list function, right? I control the output of this. I control the color coding. If I put an exclamation mark before what I type, then I can say pass this off to my local operating system and run directory listing from Windows. And the output you see here comes from Windows. This is just the regular everyday Windows dir command that you would get if you were just sitting in a command prompt. And this works for anything that Windows does. Um, if I want to ping, google.com, I can just put an exclamation mark in front of it, and this gets handed off to my native shell. So obviously, the syntax of this depends on what your operating system is, right? If you're on a Mac or on Linux, you would have to supply dash C, the count parameter, otherwise would run forever. But what's kind of cool is unlike CF execute, you can see the output is being immediately made available to us. You can actually you can interact with commands from that. So this also means that I can let me jump into a folder real quick that has all right, here we go. So you see bullet train has come alive a bit more because I'm changing into folders that have servers defined, folders that have packages defined, folders that are Git repositories, right? Bullet train is telling me all this information about it. So if I wanted to run a Git command, I could type exclamation point get status, and it runs the get status command, right? And that's just a regular old everyday get command. That's not part of CommandBox. I can even run uh I can run Docker if I want it because I have Docker installed, right? Exclamation point Docker just gets me a Docker help. So if you're inside a command box, you don't have to exit out in order to run some other program on your computer. You can kind of just use command box as your main shell. Um, there's another feature, and let me first show you the REPL in command box. Uh, REPL stands for, oops, clear the screen out. REPL stands for read, evaluate, print, loop. And every language out there basically has a REPL, and you can just run arbitrary expressions in ColdFusion, like 6 plus 5, that's 11, right? So you type some sort of ColdFusion code, and it runs that code, and you get the result right there. You can do all sorts of fun stuff with the REPL. You can even interact with complex variables. Like I can create an array called fruit. Oh, check it out. Tab completion works here. It knows the variables. Um, oh, tab completion works there. It knows all the member functions. So I can append tab completion will not work here. It does not know the names of the fruits. Um, I can append a banana into the array. I can append an apple into the array. So I'm just running cold fusion code, and the REPL remembers the variables I create. And at the end of each um, execution, it dumps out um, whatever the resulting object is. Which, when it's an array, you get this nice little JSON formatted version of it. So you can run anything you want, like the now function, right, or the hash function, where we hash a string called password, and we get an MD5 hash of it. So with that in mind, in addition to being able to run commands from CommandBox, which are things we define in ColdFusion, and in addition to being able to run native binaries that are just installed somewhere on your operating system, you can also run ColdFusion functions, which is a lot more useful than the part of the trick it probably sounds like at the beginning. But the way it works is you use, in this case, a pound sign, because ColdFusion uses pound signs to interpolate variables. Get it? Haha. And then just the name of the function, just any built-in ColdFusion function you want to run. There's no parentheses because it's not ColdFusion code. It's just a command syntax. And then we get the output of the now function, and that's the exact same thing as passing the now function into the REPL, right? Um, so in my hash example, and oh look, tab completion works even on this because tab completion knows everything. I can get an MD5 hash of the string password by running pound hash. So every single ColdFusion function that exists in Lucy is available, which includes all string functions, includes all list functions, includes date functions. What's actually kind of fun is you can say, okay, oops, I can't type. Um, now, right? And then I can pipe that into the date format function. And I think full. There we go. So you can actually pipe the output of these together because they work just like commands. So output the date, pipe it into ColdFusion's date format function, and then um, pipe that into ColdFusion's uppercase function, and then pipe that into ColdFusion's reverse function. Ah, I can't type it. Oh wow! Hit tab and there's a bunch of options. Oh yeah, look at that. 320251 Yarv Beth Yadisnu. There you go. So there's all sorts of combinations of things you can do. You can combine together native binaries, command box commands, backtick expansions, and any cold fusion function you can imagine to manipulate things as lists, to manipulate them as dates, to manipulate them as strings. And you can get a really powerful scripting ability here because we're kind of mixing cold fusion in with the command line. Trying to think if I should show any other examples of this. Actually, I think I have one on the docs that combines all three under usage, execution. Okay, here we go. This is crazy. What does this one do? Does it work? Hey. All right. So in this version, let's back up and run it one bit at a time. Um, I echo out Java dash version, which is a native command that I'm going to run. And then I pipe that into the run command, which is really what the exclamation point does behind the scenes. And this gives me just the raw output of what my Java version outputs when I type Java dash version. So this is the same as Java dash version, right? But I'm using it in this way because when you type an exclamation point, it eats the whole line. This allows me to run a native command and still keep typing command box commands at the end. So we get that, and then we piped it into uh, the ColdFusion list to array function, and in a backtick expansion, I'm using the ColdFusion CHR command or CHR function with the ASCII code 10, which is a line break. So I'm saying break up this line on line breaks and give me an array. So now I have an array of strings, right, for each line of the output. Then the next thing I did was I piped that into the ColdFusion array first function. And yes, I am piping arrays in the command line, and they're passed as JSON, serialized on one end and deserialized on the other end. And so now it takes the first line, and then the next thing we did was we passed this into the sed command, which stands for stream editor, and we say a substitute Java version space with, and then we have um, a capture group, a regular expression, and then a back reference. And so we basically strip out. Um, Actually, it's supposed to strip out just the version, but I think this version of Java. Oh, and that's the problem. This is the problem with the Java version command is different versions of Java have different syntax. There we go. And yeah, this also has a date on it. I think when I first tested this, I was using a different OpenJDK version. But yeah, you can go crazy, combining together all sorts of things to create these cool little one-liners. Um, Question: possible to type multi-line code? Yes, but it's up to you to know what keyboard shortcut creates a line break in your terminal. Every terminal has a different like combination of keys that allow you to type an actual line break without just hitting enter. And so if you know how to do that, there's no point in doing it inside of well, I guess there could be. I never really do it because I always forget what the shortcut is to type multiple lines. Though occasionally I will run into it if I'm copying and pasting something that already has line breaks in it, and let's say I'm in the REPL, um, then it'll paste in as multi lines, and this is what it looks like. And then when you hit enter, you can move up and down with your cursor and edit it, and hit enter, and it runs the whole thing. I just don't typically use that feature that much because unless I'm pasting in the no text that has line breaks, it's usually more of a pain to remember how to type them. But that's just me. Um, so I don't know if that's what you meant because your next question said like a equals 10. I don't know if you're still typing or if that was your full question. If you're asking if you can do more than one thing, like, and I don't know if you were asking about the REPL or not because I was in the REPL earlier and I didn't see when you asked that question. Um, I mean, I can have a equals 10 echo a, right? And it'll echo out the 10. So I mean, you can type multiple commands. At the end of the day, this is basically passed into the ColdFusion evaluate function. So as long as it's like valid ColdFusion, you can do whatever you want. Okay, so CommandBox tries to be very flexible and very powerful and very Cold Fusion ish for Cold Fusion developers in allowing you to do some pretty insane stuff. I don't know of any other um, command line tool in any other language at all that exists that merges the features of a language together with the ability to run native commands. With built-in commands that are all part of the shell. I don't know if that really exists. So if you have some like cocky friend who's a Node developer and always tells you how cool Node is, open up CommandBox and show him some of the crap you can do in CommandBox because he's probably never seen that before. All right, so that's really just the CLI, and how the base CLI works. We really haven't even talked about any of the main features of CommandBox, and I basically have 10 minutes left. So again, like I said, this is more of an intro topic. There's like a million things I'm not covering today. So let's quickly talk about package management. And then I'll show you how to start servers because most people actually use CommandBox primarily for dealing with servers, even though there's a wealth of cool stuff you can do. Let me go back to my sandbox folder and let me go into that food directory I created earlier. Oh, it's like I've used this directory before for something. I don't know what this file is, but I'm going to delete it. So CommandBox allows you to install things. I showed you how you can install the bullet train module earlier, but anything on ForgeBox is a package that you can install. And so if we type install ColdBox and oh look, I can use tab completion. When you use tab completion here in the install command, it's actually going out and hitting the REST API on ForgeBox to see what packages in ForgeBox start with whatever it is you typed. So you can type install and specify any package name from ForgeBox, and it will, excuse me, it will install it into the current folder. This also created a box.json file, and you can dump out the contents of files with the cat command, but it's really ugly. You can also use the package show command, and you get color coding. Yay! So in our package, we now have a dependency on ColdBox, version 6.8 or higher, but not including 7, and this is where it's installed to. We get a bunch of commands like list. I can list out the dependencies that I have installed. I can type commands like update and say, are there updates available? Are there new versions of this I can install? And CommandBox does very smart package management in that if I install something like CBORM, this is a more, is that the right name? Oh, I typed ColdBox because I'm stupid. Install CBRM. I'm busy talking about ColdBox. CBRM is a more complex package that has dependencies of its own. So when I installed CBRM, it also installed CB validation, CB I18N, and CB storages, and Mementifier, and CB streams, and CB proxies, and CB paginator, because these were all nested dependencies of this ColdBox ORM package. And so when I type the list command now, I see that my local package foo here now has a top level CBRM dependency along with ColdBox and all these nested dependencies. Now, all of these yellow ones are development dependencies. They're only used for development of the module, and there's no version next to them because they're not actually installed. They're just defined in the intermediate box.json that's inside of these packages. And of course, the update command gets a bit more interesting because now it's going to actually look for new versions of all of those. And for example, you can see the Mementifier module. We have 320 snapshot installed. I'm not entirely sure why we're installing snapshot versions. I'll have to ask somebody about that. Um, but it looks like there is a stable version of that 320 build 27. This is probably actually a bug in our build. I'm guessing that's not actually a snapshot version. I'll ask Luis about it later. So that's the package management stuff. There's a lot more to that. If you look at the if you look at the help command for the install, um, the first parameter does not have to be a ForgeBox package. You can install directly from Git repos, just like npm. Install directly from GitHub, just like npm. You can install directly from gists, just like npm. You can install from local folders and files on your hard drive, just like npm. We basically copied the npm functionality verbatim. In fact, our semantic versioning works exactly like npm. All the version ranges, the caret ranges, the tilde ranges. It's all an exact replica of the npm flavor of semantic versioning. So if you're familiar with Node and npm, then CommandBox does basically everything it does in that regard. So let's quickly cover a server and create a ColdBox CFUG folder. Okay, so starting with an empty folder, I teased around with this ColdBox create app command earlier, but I never actually ran it. Let's actually run it. There's a bunch of parameters to the command. They're all optional. So this will scaffold out a sample ColdBox application. And I know this isn't a talk on ColdBox, but this just makes a nice example. Um, if you're not familiar with ColdBox, this is the quick and easy way to play around with it. You can see we include all sorts of stuff: CFconfig files, CF format, CFlint. We have Docker files in here is just examples, Docker Compose examples, server.json examples. Basically, just a bunch of examples that shows what your ColdBox app can look like. And as part of that ColdBox create app, if I run the list, you can see we've installed the ColdBox framework as well as a dependency. There's also the TestBox framework, which again is yellow because it's a development dependency. It's not something you'd want in production. And then, in order to play around with this, we type server start. Server start is probably the most used command in all of CommandBox. Most people who only know a little bit about CommandBox only know about server start and server stop. If we look at the namespace help for server, there's a bunch of stuff you can do: server start, server stop, server status, server restart, server forget. Um, All right, the browser window opening up is automatic. That's because my server just started up. So here is our running ColdBox site. And a bunch of things just happened there. And unfortunately, I don't have much time to talk about all of them. But our site is up on localhost and it's picked a random HTTP port to bind to. The important thing here is I don't have, this is a Lucy server. And in fact, if you look down at my system tray, if you can see it, there's a little tiny icon that looks like the Lucy logo. And if I hover my mouse over it, it says ColdBox CFUG Lucy 5.3.10. And if I click on it, I have a little menu of things I can do with the server. And under the info, I can see that it's running Lucy 5.3.10. The web root is my sandbox folder, ColdBox CFUG. And here's the URL. Here's the process ID. Um, the cool thing about this is I don't have Lucy installed. I don't have Adobe ColdFusion installed. I technically have IIS installed, but we're not using it. I don't have Apache installed. I don't have Nginx installed. I don't have to have anything installed but CommandBox, because CommandBox is the fully self-contained one-stop shop thing that starts your ColdFusion servers, and it has everything it needs. And whatever it doesn't have, it'll download and it'll do it automatically. And you won't even know what it does it. So CommandBox is a great way to be able to just spin up ColdFusion servers, and I can start as many servers as I want. CommandBox just doesn't just have one server. I can change into any directory on my hard drive, and I can say, CommandBox, start a server here, and CommandBox will say, yes, sir. Right? Um, the servers can have different versions of Adobe ColdFusion, different versions of Lucy. They can technically run any Java war file that has a web.xml. But CommandBox has its own built-in web server that handles all of this. So this is my running site. You can specify a different host name. You can specify a different port. You can specify pretty much everything you can put into IIS: SSL certs, AJP listeners, URL rewrites. In fact, URL rewrites are already active. Um, on this site. If I go to main/index, I believe, yeah, that's my default route. So we have a URL rewrite already in place that adds the index.cfm inside of it, and then we're using ColdBox's SDS routes. That all comes just out of the box with ColdBox. You don't even have to think about it. And the server.json file, we can see has flags like this one that turns on the URL rewriting engine that's built into CommandBox. There's so much stuff to talk about with servers. I don't even know where to start because we're basically at the end of our time. But if you're asking to yourself, is there a way to set XYZ? The answer is basically yes. Um, if you go to the embedded server part of a docs, under configuring your server, this covers everything you can possibly do. So there's server profiles, which are like automatic lockdowns, right? Set your profile to production, and all of a sudden the ColdFusion administrator is secured, all that good stuff. There's SSL certs, there's client cert authentication, there's basic auth. Um, security, there's gzip compression. You can even tell CommandBox what version of Java you want, and CommandBox will go download that version of Java and just use it automatically. There's performance tuning, there's REST servlets, there's custom jar files you want to load, there's JVM args, all that stuff goes in there. And we also have a page that basically has like every possible option that can go into a server.json if you just want to see them all, just to know what's out there, right? Custom error pages, virtual directories, SSL settings, URL rewrites. The server rules are an entire hour-long presentation of themselves. They're super cool. You can do rewrites, you can do security with them. But anyway, that's how easy it is to get a server running. You see Bullet Train shows also the server we have started and the status of it. And there's all sorts of commands. I can say server open to open up the browser. I can say, server stop to stop it. I can say server forget, and it's like it never existed. Now, mind you, the ColdFusion code is still here, right? My web root didn't get forgotten, but the actual installation of the Lucy server that was being used is all disappeared. And I didn't show this earlier. Oh, I still have this folder open. The command box user home, which is under my user.commandbox. It has a folder called server. And whenever you start a server, this is where the actual ColdFusion engine goes, the Lucy server, the Adobe server. And so inside of this is, the webimp folder and the folders you're used to seeing. And basically this exists over again for every single server. So every time you start a server in CommandBox, it's a completely separate server from any other server you may have started in the past. So one final thing, and I think we're at time. Um, you will definitely want to install the CommandBox CFconfig module right here. It gives you a namespace of commands called CFconfig, and it allows you to import, export, and diff all of the configuration in your Lucy or Adobe ColdFusion Administrator. So, oh, this is funny. I stopped my server and forgot it, so it doesn't exist anymore. Let me restart the server real quick. So if I type cfconfig show, but I spell it correctly, I can see a JSON representation of all of the ColdFusion settings inside of Lucy. So for instance, here's my ColdBox data source, right? Here are my caches that are defined. There's a RAM cache. Here's my application timeout, buffer tag body output setting, all of those things. And I can also open up the server administrator from our little tray menu, which has gone to the wrong window. Come back over here. And my password is password. Remember me for a year. I love that feature. I wish Adobe had it. Um, so you may be wondering, Brad, how are there data sources already defined in your server? How did you already know? How did you already set your password to password? How is there a cache already defined in your server? Because this is a brand new server, right? It started at like literally 10 seconds ago. And the answer is this magic cfconfig.json file that shipped with the ColdBox application template. And it is a JSON file that defines my default data source and my default cache and my request timeout and my white space management. And when I start the server, actually, if I scroll back up far enough to when I started the server, I think it'll show up there. There's a step that says loading cfconfig into server. So when you install the cfconfig module, it will do a bunch of things, but one of the things it will do is it will look automatically for a file by convention called .cfconfig.json in the web root. And if it finds that file, it'll automatically import those settings into your server. So that way, when you start a server or your coworkers start a server, if you have all that configuration in a cfconfig JSON file, they just automatically get those settings fully imported. And that's what set my data sources. That's what set my cache. Now, you may, if you're incredibly clever, you may notice that there's nothing in here set in my password. So you may wonder how I got my default password. And for that, I'm using the CommandBox.env module. And I have a bunch of, so most of these environment variables here are actually coming from my .env file right there. And this is just a properties file, right, that creates environment variables. For the sake of the example, if I remove that guy real quick, now the env show will show me my global environment variables. So I have two environment variables here, cfconfig underscore admin password equals password, and cfconfig underscore buffer tag body output, which is a very useful Lucy setting, is true. And the cfconfig module will also pick up these environment variables and it will import them as well when it starts the server. So every time I start a server, whether it's Adobe ColdFusion or Lucy, cfconfig sees this global environment variable that I have set, and it will always set the administrator password to be password. So I can be starting servers all day long, and I always know what the password is because I have this environment variable. Super handy for local development, especially since the later versions of Lucy don't have a password set by default. Don't let you set one. Okay, so um, there's obviously a lot more, but I've talked for an hour now. The server stuff is probably the most used functionality of CommandBox, and it's very, very uh, powerful in all the options that are available. The package management, not a lot of people are building ColdFusion apps that really uses package management unless they're doing so and using a framework like ColdBox or, I mean, even Framework 1 doesn't have, modules. Preside is a CMS that has modules. ContentBox is a CMS that uses modules. Um, but that's the other kind of big, use case for CommandBox. Unfortunately, I did not even have time to talk about task runners, and task runners are amazing all on their own. So it'll be your homework to go to the docs and look up, the task runners portion of a docs. And this first page shows you how to create your own task runner. Task create dash dash open, and you can edit it and you can run it with task run. It's super cool. It's kind of like think of it like an ant build, but more similar to a shell script because you can run arbitrary cold fusion code inside of it. We use task runners for a lot of our builds at Ortus, where in the past we would use a big ugly ant XML file or maybe some sort of Gradle build or a shell script that was impossible to read. Now we just write a CFC that's a task runner, and we can just do whatever we want inside that. We can zip up files, we can publish things to ForgeBox, we can, create, the artifacts and everything inside of that. So that's your homework is to go experiment with the task runners. So unless anybody has any quick questions, I'm gonna have to jump off because my daughter has a euphonium lesson downstairs and it's about to get noisy in my house, unfortunately. So any quick questions on the chat? I've only seen the one question as I was talking. If not, then I will thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, you can always find me on the CFML Slack team. There is also an Ortus Solutions box team as well that's kind of unique or specific to our products. There is the community.ortussolutions.com discourse forum. You can ping me on Twitter. Just mention the word Cold Fusion and I'll probably pop up like Microsoft Clippy. There's lots of ways you can contact me if you have any questions. Please go ahead and ask. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, it was my pleasure. Sure. Yeah, I'd love to present some more. Also, there's an entire series of screencasts coming out on the cfcast.com website. They're all free. You just need to create an account to watch them. And I have quick little like 5-minute demo videos of a whole bunch of stuff in Command Box. So if you want some more, you can also check out cfcast.com. A few people did ask if this was recorded. I don't know the answer to that. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, guys.